Hello, our almost 5-year-old goes to sleep by 8:30 and wakes up every night between 3 to 5 a.m. and plays quietly in her bed. She has 2 toys, but then it's a struggle to wake her up for school at 8 o'clock. We saw a sleep specialist who said to stop daytime naps, but she still wakes up during the night. We let her sleep in until 9 a.m. on weekends. Anything I should change or try? And thanks.
I would try a couple of things. I would probably maybe make her sleep time a little bit later. Maybe try for 9 or 9:30. That's still going to be fine. And then I would, so that's one thing, first of all. And secondly, I would make sure that there's nothing going on in the house in the middle of the night that might be waking her up. For instance, if there are sprinklers turning on. You know, our kids tend to have much more sensitive hearing than we do, and often we don't hear things that are disruptive to them. So, you know, if there's any timer set that might be turning some outside thing on, please make sure that you change the time on that. Another thing you could do is buy her a air filter, because background noise, you know, white noise is very, very good for remaining asleep. Huge effect. So I would really recommend that. You know, these air filters, HEPA filters, yes. You can get them anywhere. And they're very good. They produce a sort of a white noise of just like air. And that's perfect because it'll block out any sudden noises. Third thing you could try is, you know, my personal favorite, and I'm not a physician and I don't want to be making recommendations in terms of supplements, but my personal favorite that I use, and I often have also given my children on nights when they're anxious or something, is Tranquil Sleep, which is a chewable sort of natural product. It's melatonin and 5-HTP mixed, and it's fabulous. It's much better than melatonin alone. Melatonin alone tends to wake you up after 4 hours, and that's another thing. Is she on something like melatonin alone? That might be the thing. But Tranquil Sleep keeps you asleep, which is, I think, very good. And, you know, try those things and see how that works. If it continues like this, then you might want to connect with a university that can do a sleep EEG, because you want to make sure that there's nothing else going on internally that's waking her up.
Okay. All great things to try. And then do us a favor and write back and let us know what you try and what works, because that helps us to know for others as well. Right. Next question. Good morning, ladies. Any ideas for my 4-year-old with challenging behavior, and they put in parentheses, escape maintained, and a significant visual impairment? He attends a special school for the blind, and they report a lot of tantrums, crying, hair pulling to get out of circle time and other daily activities. He would love to spend his day on the computer or spinning in a chair. He has a few signs, please, all done, and more, and a few word approximations, but nothing consistent. We are going to start ABA soon.
Good.
And they said, thank you very much.
I think when you start ABA, the first thing that your provider will do, the supervisor, who's possibly board certified behavior analyst, will do an actual functional assessment, which is very important because, for instance, you know that your child is probably trying to escape a certain situation like circle time. But the question is, you know, why? What are the things in circle time that are disturbing? It could be your child doesn't want to sit around other kids. It could be the environment is too intrusive. It could be it's too long, the duration of this activity. It could be too loud. I mean, there's a million other things, and we kind of have to find out what they are. I'm thinking, if it was me, the way that I would deal with it is probably I would get a baseline for what the length of time is that the child is comfortable and willing, and I would start with building that up. So I would start with just having the child go to circle time for a very short period of time, and then reward the child for good sitting, good attending, and then let the child go do something else, and then actually make it like 5 seconds longer each day so that you end up eventually doing the full session. What I'm guessing is happening here, Shannon, is that the child may sign for all done and not be able to get it because they're in circle time. So then they get frustrated because their sign isn't working, their communication isn't working. But I'm guessing all of this. So really what you need is a functional assessment, and then you usually start with what the child is capable of doing, so that it doesn't turn into a massive fight, and then you gradually build up from that. And as you build up, you will hit certain lengths of time, for instance, that are not tolerable, and the child will attempt to escape, and that's where you don't allow the child to escape. But right now, I can't tell you to block the child from escaping, because I don't know what other what other circumstances are around the situation, what's going on in that activity that your child really doesn't want to be a part of.
And I just want to stress how important that is, and give you an example, maybe some hope, that when my son was 2.5, while we were waiting to start ABA and hearing about ABA right after he was diagnosed, he was in the early start thing that they give in our city, where he would go to a gym with other kids who had some sort of developmental delay. Some of them had autism, some of them had apraxia, some had other things entirely. There were kids in the room with Down syndrome. And there was a gym, and they could run around the gym and play in the gym, but then they would go into the music room, and we'll listen to music, and we'll do sign language, and it'll all be fabulous. My son would have great time in the gym, but the minute they wanted him to sit and attend to something, he screamed, and he bit, and he kicked, he pulled other people's hair, he tried to claw his way out the door.
Believing that, but
I have some videotape. It was horrifying.
Yeah.
And that this particular center, what they suggested was that first that he have a weighted blanket. That'll help things. It'll, they put the weighted blanket on him. That didn't work, so they put a weighted vest on him. So he's got a weighted vest and a weighted blanket. Then they put him in a 5-point harness therapy chair.
Oh my God.
He was still turning it over,
that would
clawing
be even worse.
all of us, trying to get out the door because he couldn't handle it. And my husband and I would be in a basket hold with him and crying about why, and he would scream like he was being peeled. And it wasn't until a spring that, like, we got to spring break and we were just starting the process and finding out about ABA, and the other kids brought in their neurotypical siblings during spring break. And this boy who was a little bit bigger than Jem, who didn't have any STIM behaviors, walked by him and walked into the room and sat down into a chair. And I was taking that breath about, oh, we're going to go in there and it's going to be the chair, the blanket, the harness. My son walked behind this child, sat down next, pulled up a chair, sat down next to him, watched everything he did, modeled everything he did. There was no screaming, there was nothing, and he attended beautifully. But sensory-wise, there were too many things going on in the room with him, with that many kids who had different things. He couldn't handle it. He had no reference point for being in a group of people. And my son attends in a circle better than he does at anything else because he's into it now. So I just want you to know that when Dr. Granpeesheh says there may be something else going on, it could just be the light. It could just be,
so many things.
The girl with the ponytail sitting in front of him who's swishing it. But don't for a second think that that means that your child won't have the ability to attend.
Exactly. I mean, it's, as behaviorists, commonly behaviorists will tend to look at what happens after the behavior. So like a lot of times we think, oh, he gets away with escaping and therefore it's escape maintained. But a lot of times it's really a sensory thing that's going on in the environment at that time, and that's what he's trying to escape. It's not that he's doing something rewarding afterwards. It's possible. Both are possible. So someone needs to do a functional assessment to determine exactly what it is.
Yeah, and when you think about what you try to escape from sensory-wise, we were just at a presentation the other day where the microphone kept squealing.
Oh, yeah.
And I had to leave. I said, I can't handle it 3 more times. If somebody had forced me to stay in that room, I would have started clawing my way out.
Absolutely.
So, I think sometimes these things can be that way for our kids. Okay. So write in and let us know what ends up happening. And I appreciate you for writing in. Okay, hello, Shannon and Dr. Doreen. As always, a pleasure to hear your advice. I have a 9-year-old with ASD and ADHD. Some of his ASD behaviors are being repetitive, routine, and patterns with sameness, social problems, transition problems. He tends to wander, pragmatic language problems, sensory, sometimes flapping when excited. He is a bit like Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory. Love that show. He is high functioning since he is verbal, but he is not a typical 9-year-old. We now have agreed on medications due to his lack of focus in school, anxiety, and aggressive behaviors. It's helping a bit for focus in school, not for behaviors at home. How can I improve his ASD behaviors when his ADHD symptoms also get in the way, and when also looks like Asperger's? I understand the DSM-5 put it under the same umbrella of ASD, but his behaviors are so confusing to me that sometimes I don't know if there is a difference in techniques to calm the behaviors, his lack of awareness at times and tantrums, based on whether it's Asperger's or ASD. And thanks a bunch. I think this is a great question because there is some confusion about if it's happening because of ASD, do we treat that differently if it's happening because of ADHD?
Right, and she was saying Asperger's or Asperger's too.
Yes.
Okay, so it isn't really confusing. You're confusing yourself by thinking about all these labels. Okay. Let's just throw away the labels. That will finish all the confusion here. So just get rid of, just completely ignore whether he's ADHD, Asperger's, ASD, it doesn't matter. Just throw them all away. Okay. And now all you have to do is take all of his behaviors, good and bad. Behaviors are not necessarily challenging behaviors. Every behavior is a behavior. So just you look at all of his issues and you list them. And you list, okay, these are his skills and these are his problems. These are his deficits. And so now the deficits are what you're referring to as behaviors or challenging behaviors, and these are the skills that he has. And then your goal becomes just trying to handle and teach him how to better manage himself given those challenging behaviors, and figuring out why those challenging behaviors are there, and also trying to increase his skills, because the more skills someone has, the less challenging behavior they have. So don't let none of the label matters. The label with ADHD, the only thing it tells you is he has a hard time with focus and inhibition and being able to pay attention to the right things for the long length of time required. That is ASD. Whether or not Asperger's and autism are the same or different, who cares? Basically, your kid is your kid, and he has his own series of criteria, and his things are, if he's like Sheldon, he's intelligent and he has a hard time reading social cues, and he's verbal, but he's not necessarily pragmatically appropriate yet. And so there's skills you need to teach him. It's very clear. Again, I would recommend that you do go to skills, because our online skills program, even though it's the mental age is 8, and your child's chronological age is 9, it doesn't matter, because your goal will, even if you can get him to a mental age of 8, you'll be in very, very good shape. I mean, 8-year-olds are pretty savvy. So you should use skills. You should answer all the questions. If nothing else, it'll give you a series of what his deficits and skills are, where his actual problems are. Keep in mind that challenging behavior is not a symptom of any of these issues. It's not a symptom of ASD. It's not a symptom of autism or Asperger's or ADHD or any of those things. Challenging behavior is a way of communicating. It's a frustrated way of communicating. So, medication is not going to reduce challenging behavior. It's going to make him numb. It's going to basically calm him down to the point where he doesn't have the energy to show any kind of challenging behavior. But challenging behavior is his way of saying, I'm not happy with something, I'm frustrated with something, or I want something else, or I don't want to do this. It's communication. So, and of course it's not appropriate communication, as we've often said, and we want to be able to replace it with more appropriate communication. But to start with, You just have to look at it as, this is my child. He has these challenging behaviors, these skills, these deficits in skills, and I have to balance things out here. And don't even worry about the challenging behavior as much as just building up skills. The more your child understands, the more he's going to use his skills to communicate rather than his challenging behavior.
I love this question because I know a lot of people have been dealing with the school pictures, and there's nothing worse than when the picture comes back and your child is looking off to Murphy's because they couldn't get the person to get him to look at the camera. So she says, "Hi guys, how can I help my son with looking at the camera when taking pictures of him? I'll call his name, wave, say look, and most of the time he looks somewhere else. I bribed him and then he'll look for a second or two, and sometimes I can do it fast enough to get a picture out of like 100. I love taking pictures of him, but have to take so many to get one good one." She says he's 4.5, has good language, and understands pretty much everything being told. I think the problem is his attention, and it's like he can't look directly to camera or people's faces. Thanks and God bless. Love this question.
So, like everything else, we try to, we always think we're going to be able to teach it in vivo, like when it's happening. And it's really hard to do that. You kind of need to practice this separate, in other words, you have to do it a step-by-step fashion and not expect him to just be able to look when you want to take the photo. So the instruction, or what you really want, is for him to respond to the instruction, look at me, right? So, again, skills has, that's a lesson. That's a very important lesson. It's one of the first lessons we teach because unless there's eye contact, it's very difficult to have the child later look at various stimuli and look at, it's the beginning of all social behavior, obviously. And it's not just look at me, it's also being able to look at you when his name is called and so on and so forth. So, but it starts with look at me, and you practice it very separate. You're not taking photos at this time, so you're sitting in front of him and pretty close, at the same level, by the way, and in a kind of, I don't want to say confined, but in an area where he's, let's say, sitting behind a chair and a table, so he doesn't get up and leave, or, and he can certainly look around, but you don't want him getting up and leaving. And then you essentially will, the very, very beginning format to teaching this is you will have food items that he's very interested in. We used to use like we'd take an M&M and cut it in 4 pieces, so it would be a very tiny amount of sweet chocolate, and you would initially just place a small amount in his mouth so that he can actually see what it is and that it's enticing. Now, some children don't like chocolate. It should be something that is very rewarding to him. It could be a pretzel, whatever, but a small amount so that it doesn't doesn't take too long for him to eat. And then you essentially take the object and you place it at the bridge of his nose and you draw it towards your own. So the object goes so essentially it's not the object that matters, it's the movement of your hand. Okay. And you don't need to have the object there. I used to always hold the object because when I did this and the child's eye contact would touch mine, I would immediately place the object in his mouth, so it would be rewarding. Okay. But you can also just do it with your finger from his nose to yours so that he tracks your finger. And it's for an instant, it's 1 second, and you will reinforce that. And you'll keep doing that. And you're not trying to increase the length of time, you're just trying to get that 1 second contact. Then once you have that, and then you want to fade your hand movement, right? So then you'll do it less and less, and then you're not really doing this whole thing anymore, and you're kind of like, and meanwhile every single time you're saying look at me. So it's look at me, good job, look at me, good job, and then you gradually reduce the the hand motion as a prompt, and as that is gone, once that's gone, you can start building the length of time. So then you will look for a second, look for 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, and so on, and then you will increase the distance between you, and so on. There's some things you can do to make it easier. For instance, you could put on those things that you can put in the freezer that freeze and they're like a mask and yes. Your eyes are in the middle of it. We used to use cardboard and cut out cardboard just because it gives the child a frame to look into. A lot of times my recovered adults tell me that it was very hard for them to kind of find the eyes in the middle of this very rich stimulus called the face. And so being able to give them some sort of frame, which is this is where I want you to look, helps the child quite a bit. Of course, then you have to fade that out as well so that they can find your eyes without the frame. But, you know, those are basic things that you do. Once you have look at me, then you will go to calling his name. That's very easy because you're just replacing the look at me with another verbal instruction. So it would be look at me, Josh, whatever, you'd say the name, and then you gradually drop the look at me, and then he would be responding to his name, and then you can do it for cameras.
Okay.
Because the camera is right in front of you anyway, so then it will be easy to do.
Okay. And we have here on the desk something really remarkable. It's my first time seeing it. Evidence-based treatment for children with autism, the CARD model. What a remarkable thing. This is come to fruition many years in the making. This is now available.
Right. And we, of course, wrote this, myself, Jonathan Tarbox, Adele Nadowski, and Julie Kornak, and are the editors, and each of the chapters, or many of the chapters, were written by a variety of the senior staff at CARD. And it is, it's a really good summary of everything we've done and what the CARD model actually is. It goes into, it begins by talking about sort of the philosophy of the CARD model, goes into, the wonderful thing is that I just finished the diagnostic chapter, and then DSM-5 came out, so then I modified it. So this actually has the DSM-5 symptom criteria and lists the changes in contrast to the DSM-4, so that helps people. Then the second section goes into a lot of treatment procedures, everything, all the principles of acquisition, challenging behavior. And then we put in a section on sensory modification, problems with sensory issues, and all the visual modifications that we do. We talked about generalization, maintenance, treatment settings, and how they can be important. And then section 3 goes into program content. It talks about kind of everything we do at CARD and how we teach language, how we teach play, adaptive, motor, academic, social, cognitive skills, executive functioning. It's everything we do. And finally, treatment oversight. So then we also talk about what is good supervision, how do you do data collection, treatment evaluation, the training that we do at CARD, ethics from your team. And then we talked about medical treatment and collaboration with physicians. We talked about standardized assessments, testing, diagnostic assessments. And then we introduced also some concepts like the technology that we use, our skills technology, the research that we've been doing over the last few years, and the idea of global dissemination. So, and then in the appendix, which is, I'm sure, what people will love, is our language curriculum, our play curriculum, every single curriculum is in the appendix. And when you look at it like this, for instance, it's hard for you to see on the camera here, but there are levels by curriculum, so every single lesson is listed here. So it's, for instance, CARD language curriculum, level 1, eco-expands, objects, choices, people, etc., etc. And it just keeps going on. And it's for those people who've used CARD, you know that this is the most comprehensive curriculum ever. It's massive. And so, and then we also put in a glossary of ABA terms for people who kind of, want to know what is automatic reinforcement or what's a baseline or whatever. We made a glossary that's pretty good, and so I think you'll find it useful. It is on Amazon.
And I want to encourage people not only to get it on Amazon, but go to smile.amazon.com,
yes,
register for, you can pick any charity, and there are all these charities to pick from. I want to encourage you to pick Act Today, because what will happen is not only will you get this book and you'll have this information, but a portion of the sale of the book will go to Autism Care and Treatment Today, which means it'll go towards a grant for a family and an individual on the spectrum to have something that individual needs, whether it's an iPad, a fence, some assessment, some medical help, but you'll be making a difference for yourself and somebody else. I think what a great gift to give while you're getting yourself the gift of this book. And ideally, who is this book for?
Well, we started writing it for professionals, but then we actually made the language very straightforward and simple. so that it would also be very clear for parents. I mean, most of the parents nowadays are so savvy. They, like the parents who we just heard from, and I think it's escape maintained.
Yes.
That's ABA lingo, and it's just amazing that our parents have learned all of this. If you are interested in ABA or finding out more about autism and ABA, this is a really good book, no matter who you are. And of course, I'm going to say it's a really good book. But we spent over a year working on this. There's a lot of us who wrote in here, a lot of the senior supervisors at CARD, directors at CARD, who've been working with me for the past 20 years. And we kind of all brought it together. It's a fabulous resource, I would say. It's on Amazon. It is on sale right now because it just came out. So I think the usual price for it is $65, and I think it's in the mid-50s right now.
Okay, great time to buy it. And I want to encourage you, if you are a CARD family, it's the thing that you should have to have a greater understanding of what's happening in your home so that you can be a strong member on your team. If you aren't a CARD family, I would encourage you to get this book, take a look at it, give it to your ABA provider or give it to the people who are your funding source and say, this is what we want to be doing because this is evidence-based treatment.
Right.
And if you have a child who's going to school, it's a great book to give to your principal or your child's teacher or the person who's the head of the team, or if you're able to, give it to everybody on the team.
Well, my perspective, it's ideal for like students learning about ABA. So we're actually trying to see if we can get it into universities because as a textbook.
Wonderful.
Because it's a really great, very broad. Nothing like this really exists. First of all, obviously it describes our model, the CARD model, which is slightly different from other types of ABA. But more importantly, it's the only one I think that gives you this many resources. All of the lessons are in here, and just being able to talk about things like how medical and behavioral interact with each other and all that sort of stuff. And diagnostics, standardized assessments. I mean, it's got a lot of value in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to get back to some questions before we run out of time. I keep promising that we're going to get to one on Facebook. They want to know, how does Dr. Granpeesheh feel about gluten-free, dairy-free diets with children with ASD? I know, open-ended.
Well, that's one of those subjects that I end up always talking about a lot at like social events and dinners and so on. I guess I entered the world of gluten and casein free from its origination, I guess I would say. So back in the early 90s, when nobody really looked at diet, I noticed that a lot of kids that I was working with had allergic reactions to certain things, fungal infections. I think the key thing was fungal infections. And so I would see these rashes and fungus in their nails and so on, and I would refer them to various physicians, pediatricians that I knew in the area, and kind of found out that in a lot of cases there's something going on that's more food related. And also at the same time, of course, I was seeing, I was reading about kind of how gradually our food source in the U.S. is becoming more and more genetically modified food. And it was just kind of a parallel thing that was happening. I hadn't quite really decided that it would be gluten and casein until probably the mid-90s or maybe even late 90s, when we started realizing that I remember reading an article, and I think I would credit Christopher Gilberg, who's a brilliant man in Sweden, professor who introduced me to the whole concept. It was early 90s, because I'm thinking of the child on whom he consulted. It was very early 90s. And what I learned was that, individuals with celiac don't digest gluten, and that if they are exposed to gluten, it will lead to various mental issues and processing problems and attention and so forth. And from there I realized that, this could be common in our kids. And then one of the kids that I was working with was actually diagnosed with celiac, and when he went on a gluten-free diet, it changed his life entirely. He sped through his ABA program like miraculously. So it wasn't that he lost all of his symptoms all at the same time. He was, by the way, one of the cutest kids. He's now, of course, an adult and has his PhD from Georgetown. But anyway, he was. It was interesting for me to watch him through this process, because it was almost like a cloud was lifted off of his head. You know what it was, Shannon? It was the reaction you see with people who have allergies, severe allergies, and then they start taking in medication for it, and then they suddenly awake and just doing so much better. Or, people who go on thyroid medication or something like that, like just woke up right away. And so I was like, wow, this is pretty amazing. And I started kind of looking at it for the rest of my kids and wondering if this is the same thing and so on. And then I remember very early on in the 90s reading papers which were coming out of Norway at that time, which had to do with and this was Carl Reichelt's work, and it had to do with the fact that about 80% of individuals on the spectrum are found to have are not able to digest gluten and casein, being the two proteins. Gluten being the protein in whole grains, and casein being the protein in dairy. And when we say you can't digest these proteins, the real, and the more you learn about it, so the process is you take a protein. When we eat something, of course, everything has protein. So you take the protein and your body breaks it down into a chain of amino acids, which is called a peptide, right? And this then that chain of amino acids, the peptide, is broken down further into individual amino acids, which are then provide the nutrition to your body and so on. Now, with gluten and casein in particular, it is much harder to break these down and break these peptide chains down. And if you don't break the chain of peptides down properly in your digestive system, then that chain is very, very similar in its effect as an endorphin. And this is where we started talking about, if you remember back in the 90s, like the leaky gut syndrome and so on. It was these peptides were leaking. And essentially, it's not like they're leaking, they're just passing the blood-brain barrier as well, going from your bloodstream and affecting your entire ability to pay attention, learn. So there's a clear direct connection in terms of things that we're not able to break down properly, and the fact that not only do they not provide nutrition to our brain, but they also cause an endorphin type of high.
Yeah, some people even call it an opiate effect.
Opiate effect, exactly, and it keeps you from learning appropriately. So, there's the science behind it. Now, whether all children benefit from this, no. There are children who definitely doesn't matter to them. There are phases in life where it does matter. My son, when he was, I think, 2 or so, had started to drink a lot of milk, and that was the only thing he would eat. He refused to eat anything other than milk. And so I took him off milk, and that changed his life. He had these large dark rings and everything, and it just completely changed, and he started to eat normally and grow and do so much better. And so I think that in a lot of ways it's important to test for this. Now, you can do tests, organic acid metabolites, that are not 100% accurate, so you could also just do it like a challenge, test it by removing the individual from, I would do one at a time. I would do casein first, wait 3 weeks, and reintroduce a small amount of casein, like a small cup. And if you see the child, going wild, climbing the walls after they've been off of it for about a month, you'll know that the child's reacting to this. I never give my child, well, in my house, there's like so many different types of milk, it's ridiculous. For other people, we do get some regular milk, but in my house, nobody really drinks regular milk. We drink almonds, soy, rice, whatever. There's all kinds of milk in my house. But So that's kind of, I think, important to evaluate it for your own child. And the same thing for gluten. Gluten's a little bit harder. These days, though, oh my God, it's unbelievable. Like, you remember, Shannon, like back in the 90s, nobody even knew what and then there was this phase where it was like, oh, wow, there's these supermarkets called Whole Foods, and they have I used to buy gluten-free stuff and send it to the Arab countries for my kids there because there was nothing. And now here in the United States, you go to Islands. The other day I was at Islands and they have a gluten casein-free menu.
And Betty Crocker makes a gluten-free birthday cake mix.
It's amazing.
I'm allergic to wheat personally.
Yeah.
And I was long before I ever got pregnant and had a child on the spectrum. So when they said, oh, you might want to consider the gluten-free diet, I went, oh, yeah, let's do that. And it took me like another 2 weeks to find out about the casein part of it. It made a tremendous difference in my son's life. He is one of those kids that it made a tremendous difference. But the difference that I have seen in my lifetime, what I used to have to go through to get something that was, didn't have wheat in it was nutty. And now,
it's so
you can literally go almost anywhere.
Right.
I for the first time I've never been to El Pollo Loco in my life. And I went the other day and I said, do you have a gluten-free menu? Why, yes, we do.
That's
and
so
I
crazy.
Went,
it's unbelievable. Yeah, but this is the thing. We refer to these as allergic reactions, and it's not an allergic reaction. It's not really an allergy even. It's an inability to process and digest. So essentially, the symptoms won't be the same as, like, you're not going to break out suddenly or something like that. The symptoms are more like, in our kids it's a little bit different, but if you want to know for yourself, then the symptoms are more like you become lethargic to some extent, you're bloated, that's probably one of the first symptoms. You might develop some rashes, you're cloudy.
Inability to focus.
Inability to focus, absolutely. And so those, I pretty much never drink dairy or wheat and eat wheat. I almost never do anymore. If I do, out of temptation, I will feel kind of lethargic and groggy for the next day or so until it's out of my system. So
interesting.
And I was just reading earlier an article about GMO and genetically modified foods obviously also correlate in here because really they have very little nutrition to offer to begin with. And of course the first thing that was genetically modified was wheat.
Yeah.
Second thing was corn, which is also up there, soy. It's pretty
I have a friend who has celiac, so she cannot have gluten, but she can go to France, and when she's in France she can eat the bread and doesn't have problems.
Yep.
It's a very interesting thing. All right, I'm going to move on because we have only a few more minutes and I want to get through a bunch of questions. Okay, my 5-year-old still head banging every time she gets frustrated, anxious, or confused. Where I live in North Carolina, ABA is not covered by insurances, nor is it provided by the state. I have been paying out of pocket a huge amount of money for 10 years of ABA, for 10 hours, of ABA a week, but the provider is as lost as I am. We tried social stories, ignoring the behavior, giving her a ball for her to squeeze it. It looks like to me for every situation, whether it's for anxiety or lack of communication skills, we should have different approaches, but I don't know what else to do. This is very serious, headbanging.
This is very serious. If you have a provider who doesn't know what to do, change your provider. Because I could tell you, and I haven't even seen your child, I could give you at least 20 different interventions right now. So if your provider is board certified, first of all, if they're a BCBA, if they're not, switch and find someone who is. And you can also call CARD, by the way. We're not in North Carolina, but we do have our senior trainer is in South Carolina, and I'm certain she could help you. So you are correct. All of those different things that you listed are different functions and different reasons. So you cannot treat a behavior based on its topology, what it looks like, topography. It's like, doesn't matter if he's headbanging. Okay, that's the description of the behavior, but the reason for the headbanging could be certain times anxiety, certain times frustration, certain times something else. So, or could just be a habit, or could be just he's enjoying certain aspects of it. Whatever it is communication. What he's trying to communicate depends on the function. So sometimes he might be communicating and saying, I don't want to do this. If you make me do this, I'm going to bang my head. And other times he might be, I don't want to be in this situation. It really makes me very anxious to be here. I'm going to bang my head. Because when he bangs his head, or she, I think it's a boy. She? Okay. that we don't know. So when she bangs her head, she's basically trying to avoid a situation that she's being put in. It could be a high demand situation, or it could be a high anxiety situation for her, whatever it is. Whatever is happening, what you do is you make the situation easier for the child to handle. You prevent the head banging, and you reinforce an alternative way of communicating. Those are the basic things your behaviorist has to do. Now, you cannot do this alone. I gave you very global, large answers, and you need a behaviorist to be able to give you 10 examples of each one of these things. Here's an idea. Go on our BIP Builder, which you can find at...
It's skillsbipbuilder.com.
Right.
Skillsbipbuilder.com.
So skills, SKILLS, and then BIP, the word builder.com. And there you will answer. So I think if you go there, you will have the CFA on there as well. Mm-hmm. So first there's a questionnaire called the CARD Indirect Functional Assessment, and you'll answer a bunch of questions about this behavior. You say, this is my behavior, head banging, and then it'll ask you a bunch of questions like, when does it happen, under what circumstances, etc., etc. And then it'll take you to the BIP Builder, and there it'll give you a whole bunch of solutions, treatment ideas, and actual treatments or interventions, behavioral interventions, and you can select them and try them one at a time. Your behaviorist should be doing all of this, but if you don't have access to one, you can do this. And once you get the intervention in place, then you need a team of people to work with the child. Historically, a lot of people always have confusion when a child headbangs, and historically there was a behavior called self-injurious behavior where the child would headbang. That was a behavior that had an automatic function, so the child was not doing it in front of other people necessarily, wasn't doing it to gain attention or to freak you out or to try to get out of a situation. They're just doing it out of sensory pleasure, just being able to get the sensory input. So don't confuse the two. I often, when parents come and say, but isn't this just self-injurious behavior? And I'd say, well, if it occurs when he's alone, yeah, but if it occurs only in certain circumstances or when there's a person around, then that tells you right away that it's not an automatic function.
Okay, good to know. So please write back to us and let us know. I've got 4 more questions I want to get in 6 minutes. Can we do it?
Sure, we'll do our best.
I'm a mother of a 14-year-old who is diagnosed autistic. We are from Bangalore, India. He is a very verbal kid, goes to a day program. Need your kind assistance and expertise as he is getting into his teen years. Kindly advise, how do I manage his transition to teen and behavioral issues?
That's a really big question, and I would really suggest that you get involved with our online technology, because you're going to need a few things. You are going to need to go on IBT's website, Institute for Behavioral Training, which is ibehavioraltraining.com. There you learn techniques, behavioral techniques that are very, very important to know. Then you will go on skillsforautism.com, and Skills will give you an assessment that you answer for your child, questions about your child. Doesn't matter, don't worry about the age. Then it'll give you a curriculum of what things are still lacking, and it'll tell you exactly how to teach them. If you know the techniques, then teaching them will be very easy. And there you also have access to things like the BIP Builder and so on, which will tell you how to manage any of his challenging behaviors. If you can't get online and do those, buy this book, because this has all of that in it as well. This is the evidence-based treatment for children with autism, the CARD model. It does actually go into all of that, the transitions that occur in adolescence, but it's different for every child. So it's important to know the techniques or learn the background so that when a challenging behavior occurs, you know how to handle it.
Okay. We touched on this briefly, but I promised them yesterday that I would get your opinion. After only 5 weeks in kindergarten, the school is suggesting that we look into other out-of-district options like local children's home society, which, forgive me, but I don't see how my son fits that setting. I may or may not have legal advocate on my team. We shall see. I wanted to tour this place to see why anybody thinks it would be an option, and the school is telling me I need to tour the school with a district employee that I don't know. Any advice? And that they're in South Dakota. And my suggestion was to go back and ask them, why are they wanting, after 5 weeks, why are they already looking at different settings? What is that about? And I was reminding her that the school has to, if what they have isn't appropriate, they have to provide what is appropriate. And if that costs them money, it's their problem, not hers.
Right. That's a Free and Appropriate Education Act, and yes, that's correct. They have to provide your child with a free and appropriate education. Now, most likely, if after 5 weeks they're telling you to change setting, it's because your child might be having tantrums or aggression towards other kids and they don't know how to handle it. It is their problem. They do need to provide resources to you. They need to provide a resource specialist who can provide a behaviorist, who can do a functional assessment, who can figure out why your child is having behavioral issues in the classroom, and then they need to provide an aid for your child so that the aid can help your child and manage his behaviors and teach him how to behave in a classroom. In fact, if you take it all the way forward, they're obligated to provide you even an in-home program. I don't know also what the insurance mandate situation is in South Dakota. You should probably look into that as well. I do know that we are just about to start services, and I want to say it's either in South Dakota or North Dakota. I don't remember which one. It's where there are a lot of military bases. So, you know, if the answer that I'm giving isn't helpful enough, please go on our website, the Center for Autism website, and go to our remote services tab. And it'll talk more about how we can help you.
And you can even call the 800 number. They're
Certainly.
happy to take that 800 number
and
help you with the remote services. Great. And then let us know what happens. I love this question, so I'm going to go there. Hi, Shannon and Dr. Doreen. I'm being out ABA'd by my neurotypical kid at times. My neurotypical 8-year-old teenager will say, if you don't do this, I won't do that, what you want me to do. Then she puts me on extinction. Love this. She does this to her older ASD brother too. What to do or say when this happens? Thank you for explaining in a way that we can understand.
That's awesome. Yeah, so, you know, the person who has the power is the person who holds the reinforcer. So let's just put it that way. Now, fortunately, as parents, you hold the reinforcer, so which is whatever it is, but pretty much everything that a child wants or a teenager wants involves money. So you hold the reinforcer. So you have to be, you know, if you're being placed on extinction, make sure that you are not reacting to whatever it is. So she'll say, I won't do this until you X, Y, and Z. First of all, you don't do the things she's asking you to do.
I always say I don't negotiate with terrorists.
Exactly. That's basically, Shannon just explained it perfectly. Do not negotiate. That's exactly right. But, you know, so I often, you know, there's an underlying issue when it comes to teenagers saying, I won't do this until X, Y, and Z, because they're from their perspective, they're doing things to please you, whereas realistically, what they're doing is for their own good, right? And there's an underlying problem in that the teenager is not understanding the relationship between what they're doing and how that affects their own life. This is not really, you know, I mean, with my kids, if one of them doesn't want to do something, I will spend a very, very vast amount of time explaining how this will affect their future from this point until the end of time, you know, and often I think it's very clear for them what pleases me and what doesn't please me. Those are certain things. You have the reinforcer. The reinforcers are money, obviously, but also your love and being pleased, I guess. And if you are rewarding your child all the time regardless, then you've given too much reinforcement and the child's satiated and couldn't care less anymore. So you should be sure that your own behavior, you should check your own behavior and make sure you're only rewarding when your child is actually doing what they're meant to do, teenager or not. on the spectrum or not, doesn't matter. ABA is the same for everyone. So as Shannon said, don't negotiate and only provide reinforcers when the appropriate thing is occurring.
And I should say that I don't actually say that phrase to my son. When he says to me, well, if you don't do this, then I'm not going to do that, my initial reaction is, okay. And I walk away, and then he comes back and he goes, well, wait a second, I want, and then we, a discussion can come from that. If he's saying, well, what I want is this, isn't that what you want? Then I'll negotiate. But in the moment, I just go, okay.
And it sounds like you're worried, the parent is worried that they're being placed on extinction. I promise you, all teenagers have ways, there are certain things that make them jealous.
Yeah.
So, spend time doing other things that the teenager would want to be involved with.
And then they'll want to.
Yeah.
All right.